level within the internet to manage that identity, to control that identity. And blockchain, in theory, gives you that ability. What's interesting to me is how well it can do at scale and at speed. And that's the challenge for the tech today, is can it scale up and work at speed in real time for the globe. Certainly can't do that today.
Yo, what is up? This is Christian D. Evans, host of Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. And I just want to share with you real quick, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. It really means a lot to us, but also our community. And, if you like this, please share this with your friend, your family, a colleague, someone that you don't even like. Definitely share that with them. And then also leave a comment and a review for us. We really do appreciate that. And show our guests some love if you find that this episode really resonates with you. Secondly, also want to share with you some really awesome news. I've had the Fortune Opportunity Network and have incredible guests, 8 and 9 figure entrepreneurs, CEOs, and founders on our podcast. And what we've done is we've actually been able to open up a Be Uncommon If You Can Mastermind, where we're able to open up the door for so many of you, right? Those that are 6-figure, 7-figure entrepreneurs that are scaling, that are struggling, that really want to level up their game, their business, their life, whatever it is. I'm able to open up that door for you with this Be Uncommon If You Can Mastermind. Now, we're only taking a select few of individuals. So what you'll need to do is go to christiandeevans.com/mastermind-now. And the link is actually in the description as well. Guys, that is christiandeevans.com/mastermind-now. We're only opening this up for a select few of individuals that really want to level up their game. You have a conversation with me, see if you qualify. And guys, enjoy the episode. And remember, be uncommon if you can. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have someone remarkable in the marketing industry, in the B2B kind of category itself. He's just a huge player in this industry because it's all about personalization. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have him on here, because there's so many different ways to deploy marketing effective campaigns, but obviously you can also do it wrong, definitely in the B2B world. And so this individual is the founder and CEO at Radiate B2B, Radiate B2B, with 20 years of experience in advertising and marketing technology. He has previously built global video advertising networks, exited his previous startup to Silverpop before expanding Silverpop internationally. In 2013, Silverpop became IBM's marketing cloud platform. He's previously sat on the DMA Email Marketing Council, taught at the Institute of Digital and Direct Marketing, and he is a huge player in this industry. Please welcome Riaz Kanani. How you doing, my man?
Chris, really good to be here. Really good to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited about it because obviously you're a big player in the B2B world, but you've been able to pivot massively, definitely with this company. But let me ask you this though, before we jump into this, okay? You're seeing this massive, I was reading one of your recent posts about LinkedIn here, about personalization, right? Personalization. And, in the B2B world, obviously your biggest thing is how do you collapse that close ratio, increase the average contract value? And I'd love to kind of just get your response like, okay, with your company, how are you able to do that for B2B players?
Yeah, sure. So the big thing underlying all of this is that it's really super easy to push content in front of people today, right? That fundamentally is the big change that's going on. It's easy to publish a YouTube video. It's easy to write a blog post. You can get your content out there so easily. And it's the same with marketing and sales, right? It's now really easy to click send on an email list and deliver hundreds, thousands, millions of emails. And of course, in our inboxes, we're receiving all of this and it's all bland and static, right? And that's why personalization is key. And so what we're doing is saying, well, actually, you've got to put the customer at the center of what you're thinking about, understand what their needs are, and then tailor your messaging so that when you are putting a message in front of them, whether that's email, whether that's in social media, indirectly through a social media post, you're talking to them as if there's a conversation to be had, right? You're valuing that content. I mean, only this morning I got an email that came through. The email was basically thinking we would need to talk to somebody about advertising in the B2B space. Given that's one of the things that we do, quite clearly they've never even looked at the website at our website or anything that we do. So just a generic email that was sent out.
Well, and you're seeing that a lot in today's world. I mean, LinkedIn obviously is a B2B, a huge B2B player, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found very interesting about what you guys really focus on is obviously, like I said, is increasing the average contract value, but also really collapsing the close ratio. Because I've heard some close,
Yeah.
and it takes 30, 40, 60, 180 days in order for it to close. Now, you are talking larger deals, and you're also talking obviously a lot more decision makers. However, though, that's a big, kind of offer saying, hey, we're able to collapse that time frame. And I'd love to kind of dive into that. What are strategies to be able to help you do that?
At the heart of this is account-based marketing. Really what you're doing with account-based marketing is, rather than taking a whole market, which you don't really know, if you go and ask a demand gen marketer or someone who's not doing account-based marketing to talk about the companies, the actual specific companies, and they won't be able to tell you. They'll tell you some of the variables that make up that market, but that's as far as it goes. And so step one in an account-based marketing route is to know who those companies are. And once you suddenly realize that, you suddenly start to be able to put together messaging. And in our case, so for example, you're able to tailor an advertising message out to an individual company. So we've had clients who have put advertising that says "Hello Barclays" in their banner adverts, right? It's quite aggressive. It's not necessarily the right way to go about doing things, but it depends on your brand. But the key thing here is that once you start to connect, and the person on the receiving end starts to realize that there's a conversation to be had, what happens is two things. One is we're able to identify and figure out earlier when a company is in research mode, right? So something like 17% of the buying cycle is spent with all vendors. And of course, you're not talking to one vendor, you're talking to multiple vendors. So it's not difficult to realize you're going to be spending single-digit percentage amount of time with this vendor. They've been researching and looking at your space for a long time beforehand. So what we want to do is identify people in that research phase so that companies can start to engage and have a conversation earlier. And that does a couple of things. One is it obviously influences their viewpoint in terms of, what are the key topics that they should think about? Well, of course, the topic that they should think about, the topics that obviously you are also thinking about from your product. You're effectively aligning strategy between the two. And so that immediately means that you start to be on the same page much more. You start to be listening more to what clients' needs are. You're able to tailor it more. You're able to spend more time. And so as a result, you end up with a package, if you like, your total contract, that is much closer aligned to the company's needs. And of course, that means it's going to be larger because they're able to take more of your services. The other side of that is when you are in a B2B sales cycle, selling to enterprise, average sales cycles are going to be at least 6 months. And so you're not going to find a company of that size that is willing to spend week in, week out with you over 6 months. Of course, it's not one person. There's probably a dozen stakeholders involved, right? On average, it's something like 8 or 9. And so they're having to pass information off to other people behind the scenes. There's back and forth going on. And of course, you're not the priority. There's lots of other priorities. And so when you're putting advertising in front of those people, you're doing two things. One is you're increasing the hygiene of your brand, making it feel like going with your brand is safer. Because you're able to communicate those messages, but also it acts as a nudge effect, right? It allows you to remind the person who has got their mind on something else at this point in time, oh yeah, I've got to do that. And you're able to do that without interrupting them, right? Sending them an email every other week, chasing them for something starts to get irritating if you're not doing it well. So you're able to nudge them from afar. And what we see is, as a result, the time taken to act on things starts to drop. And of course, that means that contracts end up getting closed faster.
Wow, that's incredible insight. And so let me ask you, because I know a lot of individuals that run a B2B world, definitely in software as well. And obviously, in order to, you got to make sure that it's a very cost-effective acquisition channel of some sort, right? Whatever channel that is, you want to make sure that it's effective and you can withstand that loss for a period of time until you obviously start seeing some more larger revenue on the back end. Now, again, I'm a big believer any acquisition channel can work. It's just a matter of which one collapses timeframes is more productive and a faster return on investment. So my question to you is, now I know it depends upon each industry, but let's say, for example, someone has a B2B, they're doing about $3-4 million. What have you noticed to really help them get to that mid 8-figure, business? What are those channels that really, and really, like you said, personalize, scale the unscalable, that really help dial that in? What channels would you recommend?
It really does depend a little bit on the audience that you're selling to, but at a broad scale, first of all, understanding where your customers are playing is key, right? So for us, LinkedIn is a really critical channel for us. For other companies, it might well be Facebook, it might well be Instagram, it might well be Twitter, but it's understanding where those are. Now, social media is a place that most people today are going to and engaging on and off for content. And so from an influencing standpoint, from a building your thought leadership position, that is an important place to be, to build layer upon layer of authority, if you like, trust, right? Fundamentally, if you're going to start to build more and more relationships with more and more companies, if you're going from 3 million to 8 million, to scale to that, yes, you've got to scale your sales team. Yes, you've got to scale your marketing spend. But fundamentally, what you're trying to achieve is a broader trust across a broader part of the market. And so, advertising and social media, advertising across the board is all going to build that thought leadership alongside it. But of course, advertising on its own isn't going to work, right? It builds your brand, but it doesn't build enough thought leadership. And so you have to have things like, you can get to 3 million without a big story. You can build it just tactically and transactionally. But if you're going to grow to a much larger organization, you've got to have a story that's a mission that you can get behind, that you can then layer thought leadership on top of, and then push that out through all the various channels. PR gets underrated, I think, today. I think that doesn't get enough call into people's tactics at that stage. But also, what was I going to say? It comes back to this idea of emotion as well, right? And I know I'm in some ways not answering your question in terms of the specific channels, but I think channels falls out of all of this, right? It is less a case of this is your set list of channels that you need to go to, and it's more a case of what's my story, where's my audience, right? Let's act. And there's a great video that sadly I didn't create, but the head of growth at Facebook created many years ago when he was mentoring for Y Combinator, which talks about some of the mathematics behind growth and how you can measure the spend at an acquisition, from an acquisition level, and how you can scale that over time to see where you max out specific channels. Now that's great for B2C, right? Because you're talking about instantaneous actions that you can then measure. In B2B, that's impossible to use. Like that's, for me, how you end up going down rabbit holes that just end nowhere, because it's really short-termist for B2B. And what happens is that you end up selecting channels that delivers you leads in the short term, but actually in the long term are not building up the scale. And so there's a big topic at the moment called the dark funnel. And there's a lot of advocates for adding things like a question to the end of silent forms, which says, where did you hear about us? Now, that's nothing new. We've had that question asked many times. You pick up the phone to a company and sometimes, they should be asking you, where did you hear about us? And that free form text response often gives you an insight into what we really know as marketers anyway, which is, it isn't about just the campaign that I did last month, or this email newsletter that I just sent out. It's often things that you may have done 3 months ago, 6 months ago. It's been reinforced, or it's word of mouth and someone's recommended you, or I saw you speak on that podcast with Chris, right? And you can't measure those things, and that's what the dark funnel is all about. Is it's all those activities that are happening where you aren't measuring them happening, and that turns into a lead, an inbound lead, which actually, as we all know, inbound leads do a lot better in terms of closing than cold outbound.
Well, see, what's interesting, you brought up a really good point, because I think it's like the concept of like yin and yang, right? In order to be great, you have to avoid being good, right? And that's an intentional decision. And it's the same thing with short-term thinking versus long-term. In order to have long-term, you literally have to eradicate short-term thinking. And sometimes as business owners, when we just think dollar and cents, it's tough. And so I'm just curious, and I know we're kind of getting into the paradigm a little bit behavioral, but I'd like to get kind of your experience. And when you're working with these companies and being able to really help do that, increase the contract value and decrease the close, selling cycle. Because you have to, in order to do that, you have to think that long term, right? And it may not happen tomorrow. It may not happen 30 days. It may happen 60 days, but now it's a system that's going to, consistently produce over, X period of years. So yeah. I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about that in that paradigm, and really being able to help our listeners eradicate that short-term thinking totally. And what's the right way of thinking long-term?
Well, to give you a stat that I saw recently about account-based marketing programs is often the payback for an account-based marketing program is above 12 months. Now, that's really difficult if you're starting from scratch, because that's not just one budget. It's not your first year's budget, it's your second year's budget as well. And of course, how difficult is it going to be to get the second year's budget if the money you spent in the first year hasn't yet paid back? But we know that there are ways to build ABM programs that will pay back within 3 months, 6 months sort of time frame, in terms of showing promise to pay back in any case, because obviously most opportunities are going to take 6 months to move to close in any case. So yes, you have to think about that, and there's a couple of ways that we think about that. One is work with companies that you know something about, right? So this is where our intent data offering starts to come in, and we listen, we work with data partners to listen across the internet to find out what topics companies are interested in today. And we think of it as opportunities to have a conversation, right? It's not about, this is a lead that you need to go in and turn into an opportunity. It's about opportunities to have a conversation. And suddenly when you start to think about it as building relationships, you start to measure different things that lead up to and build up to that opportunity that you want to build. So most companies are not going to be able to just switch off their demand gen at a moment's notice. And to be honest, most companies shouldn't switch off their demand gen. In fact, what we see is that you start off with your inbound or demand gen strategies on one side, that's delivering your short-term pipeline generation. You then have account-based marketing alongside it, which is starting to look at and build and understand your market over the long term and how that scales and moves. And then as you start and continue to scale your account-based marketing program, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it takes over more and more of the demand gen strategies that you've been using. And so actually, you may well end up calling your whole program a demand gen program, because it is delivering in the short term as well as the long term. But a lot of the techniques that you're using are actually all account-based marketing techniques. You're just now using them at scale across the board. And it's a journey.
Well, see,
right?
Yeah. And that's I love what you're saying there, because it is a process. And I just want people to understand it's not going to happen overnight, but having that right process and right thinking as well, because the right questions will lead to the right answers. But if you're asking wrong questions, it'll lead to the wrong, answers, of course. Now, you do say something here, and which I find very interesting. I'm just going to quote it. We identify companies showing buying behavior early so you can build stronger relationships. Now, you've mentioned personalization, and I really kind of want to pull back a little bit and say, okay, what does that look like? Because, you know, I think you mentioned something in one of your posts. It said, no, it's not just about hi, first name. It's about being very intentional. So I would like to dive deeper into that and saying, hey, what other things can you do that are really good tactics that really make you stand above the crowd in personalization?
Yeah, no, sure. So, well, so look, let's take that intent data, right? We're listing at various topics. Let's take, I obviously have a big background in email marketing. So let's say you're an email marketing agency. You're selling email marketing campaigns, deliverability services, email audits type stuff, right? Now, we can go and listen for email marketing platforms, email marketing services, deliverability, all these sorts of things. So starting from the top level, high level email marketing interest, going down, narrowing it down into more detailed topics. And so when you get the report back and you start to look at these reports, you start to be able to see, well, okay, yes, they're interested, you know, they're showing much more heavy interest in email marketing than before. They're looking at, let's say, deliverability within email marketing. Now, when I'm putting together a message for that company, you know, typically as a company, you've got 2 or 3 different USPs that you're going to be able to, you know, sell to, if you like. There's different ways you can sell your product. And in this case, you chose the email marketing agent because it's quite easy to understand. Like, you could have a deliverability product, an audit product, and you might approach a prospect generically if you didn't know anything about them. But I do know something about them. I know they're looking much more heavily at deliverability. So my message is going to center around deliverability, right? It's going to be, hi, you know, good to connect. Thought you might be interested in this, you know, in this particular topic. It could be a white paper on deliverability. It could be a recent case study, whatever it happens to be. It could even be nothing. It could just be a couple of lines around, you know, we're working a lot on deliverability. It doesn't need to be heavy-handed and direct, because of course you don't know them. And you know, it's sort of an extension of the adage of, you know, when you first meet somebody, you don't ask them to marry you. It's a journey, right? And you need to build that up. And so what you're trying to do is to show that you have knowledge about an area that they're currently interested in today. And that's what personalization is about. To be honest, we should all know what each other's first name is. In the first place, right? There's no excuse for a generic hello anyway. So that's your starting point.
I love it. I love it. So let me kind of talk, because I you know, kind of pivot a little bit, because
Sure.
you know, you've been able to accomplish some incredible things, right? And I'm a big believer that even when you're accomplishing great things, you had to experience really devastating things, right? To be able to have that perspective. Yeah. So my question is kind of tell us a little bit about your journey. You've been in the industry for many, many years. You've been able to have an amazing exit strategy, but obviously with that incredible amount of experience. And so I love to kind of, you know, tell our, you know, listeners kind of a little bit of, you know, your failures that you've experienced, and because of that, you've been able to obviously impact, you know, many businesses because of that.
Yeah, it amazes me. It's been 20 years. That number always terrifies me when I hear it. But yeah, I mean, I never thought I would get into marketing. I mean, I didn't know what marketing was, let alone think I'd get into it. I have always had a love of psychology, and I've always had a love of tech. And actually, you put psychology and tech together, you kind of get marketing, but I didn't really know that. And you know, I started off in when the internet first started really, and just doing consultancy type stuff of trying to figure out how people will use the internet, right? Back in those days, it was a completely new way of doing things. This idea that you could just go somewhere to find information instantly, today seems you know, second nature. But and so that's where I started, primarily because I was interested in tech more than anything. I was trying to play with new ideas and new ways of doing things, and eventually we found a piece of technology that could play video across 90-something% of computers. Now, this was before broadband, so 56K modems playing video type stuff, right? And I thought, along with the other two co-founders, that this is gold dust, right? This is a no-brainer. The nearest competitor at the time was Windows Media Player, QuickTime, and these guys could play on no more than 30% of the computers in the market. So suddenly, who wouldn't want to put a piece of video on their website in this piece of tech that they knew everyone could play? And for me, no brainer. 1 year of banging on doors, making phone calls, talking to people, and getting no real interest at all taught me that it's not about how easy tech is or how amazing tech might be, and it's actually about how easy it is for the customer to actually implement, deliver, use, take advantage of, get value from, whatever the phrase it is you want to use. And in the end, we then transform that business into a video advertising network. Now, in hindsight, potentially we should have created a user-generated video platform, and maybe it would have been the next YouTube, but we didn't. We created a video advertising network that delivered ads across the globe. And in the very early days of that, even though we'd made it really easy, commercially it was quite difficult, because video in the advertising space was all bought and sold in terms of TV. And we were selling it like you would buy a banner ad on the internet. And so we tried to translate the model into a TV model to sell the advertising, which again, just made it easier to buy and made it easier to understand. And so we started with that, and then eventually were able to translate and move across over time as the industry became more au fait with internet advertising, to then change to a CPM model that then scaled over time. And so, one of my big learnings is it's really easy to live inside your bubble. Right? In my world, 99% of people out there know what ABM is and how to implement ABM and deliver great ABM programs. In reality, the number of people who can do that is very, very low today. And we believe, obviously, in the next 3-5 years, that's going to transform completely. And in fact, it's that brought me back to building a new startup and setting up Radiate.
Because when you say you pivoted, obviously you had an exit strategy, and you obviously pivoting into this new company. What was the driving force to say, hey, you know what, I want to start and create this startup, if you will, now?
Yeah, I think it is 10 years ago, I guess. What are we, 2022? Yeah, 10 years ago, I said I would not do any more startups. It was about the time when we exited, Silverpop exited to IBM. I just had a daughter. I thought, doing a startup is all consuming, as many of the audience I'm sure will know. And I said that I was going to get out of marketing tech. Now, bear in mind, I'd spent most of my career in marketing tech or marketing agency land. And I just felt that what was going on in marketing tech was dull. It was basically the same thing automated with data science, big data, as the buzzword was back then. It just wasn't very interesting to me. And so I tried to broaden out and get into artificial intelligence more broadly, and try and do different things. And eventually, it felt like a decade, but was only 4 years later, I got to the point where there's so much new opportunity out there. I think for me, the next 10 years, the next 20 years are far more interesting from a societal change perspective to the last 10 years. I think a lot of the last 10 years has really been building on existing platforms. If you like, fundamentally, everything we're doing today in the internet space is built off the fact that the internet was built in the mid-90s. Yes, it's now mobile. Yes, we're expanding it, but it's the same basic paradigms. But in the future, we've got dramatic change. And so I was really interested in looking at, blockchain, Internet of Things, and we played with various startups for a period of time. I set up with a couple of friends a a platform that looked at content. One of the things that as marketers we do an awful lot is we write a lot of content, and sadly the majority of it is pretty crap. And so as a buyer, you have to wade through that crap to get to the good stuff, right? And for me, Google is not getting better at that problem. It's getting worse at that problem. If you want to find the good quality B2B content out there that was written 2, 3, 4 years ago, it's actually quite hard to find. And so what we wanted to do was to build a platform that you could surface the high value B2B content. And that really got me energized, and it brought me back into the startup world. And in reality, the market wasn't ready. We weren't able to hold out long enough to be able to commercialize it. And so we closed that down. And what I realized was, I think part of my subconscious was, obviously the problem was content, right? And the fact that there's so much of it. But I wasn't allowing myself to do a marketing tech startup because I said I wasn't going to do a marketing tech startup, right? So 2 years later after that startup, and I sat down and really looked at this and was like, well, actually, the problem is generic content. And if we can find a way to create more relevant, more personalized content, we can target it really narrowly. You can start to build on that and actually completely change that. And this is the big thing, that we're not there yet, but you can completely change the way what I thought back then was marketing would go to market. And the way they think about going to market was going to change. So no longer did you need to be just throwing things out there and hoping things stick. And you know, a lot of B2B marketing has become about writing lots of content, hosting lots of events, these pre-COVID, and then just pulling the low-hanging fruit and passing it across to sales. And what we've realized is actually it's not just B2B marketing at all, it's B2B sales as well. The way sales teams are selling today is having to change, just because people are much more digital, they're much more multi-channel, they're much less likely to pick up the phone or answer the phone, and they're even less likely to want to speak to a salesperson. And so the barrier for you to build a relationship, you have to build it high, you have to build a stronger relationship to have a deeper conversation. And so for me, the next 5-10 years actually will see a complete transformation of B2B sales and marketing. And we're just a couple of steps into that journey today. And that's what brought me back is, you know, I don't think this is going to be an evolution. I think it's going to be a revolution.
So let me ask you, because you're bringing up really solid points, and I appreciate you thinking about this futuristically, because see, you know, definitely with COVID, you know, positively, everything has been pushed digital, right? And now we can be more remote and obviously more, to me, more optimized in our time, right? And produce, the output is much better now, because now you don't have to waste all your time and energy and all sorts of stuff. So anyways, my question is, where do you see obviously that sales, that marketing integrated with the new technology? And I'm not just talking about the basic of, oh, more ads. I'm talking about, like, obviously, like you said, integrating with blockchain, integrating with VR, integrating with that very personalization, right? We now know a lot of information, data, Facebook, Google, they know a lot of this data that's going to even become even more so, and it's going to be at our fingertips. So I'd love to just hear your response on that.
Yeah, I potentially I'm a weird marketer in that I'm very pro-privacy. I think one of the best worlds we could live in is one where the individual has ownership of their own data and has control over what gets shared with advertisers, marketers, and they can remove that by their own requirements. Whereas today it's the inverse, right? You pass your data to the advertiser and marketer, and you hope that they will look after your data. And for the most part, we don't care until something bad happens. And so, you know, and we are seeing steps towards that moving. So I certainly agree that there's more and more data out there. And actually there's more and more data out there that doesn't necessarily tie to an individual, right? You can tie it to a company, you can tie it to a broader company's behavior, what's going on at a company. That sort of information can infer need, and that's all you require as a sales and marketing person, right? You just need to be able to identify that. And then once you start to have that relationship and you've got those people that you know, then you can drill deeper into getting that content. So I see the way, the top of the funnel, if you like, the way you take data and interpret data is going to dramatically change. And of course, AI is going to play a big part of that going forward. Blockchain, I think, is a massively interesting piece of tech. I think it's really early. I think it's massively overhyped still for where the tech sits today. The benefits could be huge for marketers in the sense that it could potentially power that data sharing, data control part that I talked about initially. But actually, I think there's a lot of unknown with blockchain as to where it can go. I mean, if you look at the thought leaders in the blockchain space today, they're talking a lot about the missing protocol in the internet, right? So the internet's obviously got, without getting too technical, it's got a HTTP layer, it's got a TCP layer. They talk about the data moving between it. It doesn't have a concept of identity. So there's no ability at a low level within the internet to manage that identity, to control that identity. And blockchain, in theory, gives you that ability. What's interesting to me is how well it can do at scale and at speed. And that's the challenge for the tech today, is can it scale up and work at speed in real time for the globe. Certainly can't do that today, but that's good. Like, that's a good place to be if you're seeing opportunity with a piece of technology and the barriers to it succeeding are technical. Well, as a technology person, that's a great place to be. Right now, we've got to solve some problems. So, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily market ready. From a VR standpoint, I'm a big fan of VR. I've had VR headsets since they were dev kits type stuff and played with them and tried them. To this day, the thing that amazed me the most, and this isn't really related to marketing, but the thing that amazed me the most was sitting in a 3D cinema watching a 2D movie. I never thought that would blow me away, but it actually, not everyone has got massive home theater kits, and even then, they don't transform you in the same way as it does when you're sitting inside a black room watching a movie on a massive screen that, let's face it, most of us don't have at home. You can completely pull that off with VR. The sad thing, of course, is that that's not going to drive the VR market at all, really. Let's face facts. And so it needs to do more. I actually think it will go the way of the PC market initially, where it's going to be the work side that drives it rather than the entertainment side initially. So obviously PCs took off because people use them at home to do work stuff and at work to do work stuff like Excel or Lotus 123 as it was back then. And VR for health and for training and that side of things is going to be massive, right? And education. I think those are the big low-hanging fruits. From a marketing standpoint, I think the major win is actually PR, right? So in the metaverse falls into this with VR. The metaverse is really just a new way of saying virtual reality. In my book, virtual reality has become a little bit mundane. It hasn't really worked. So we need a new marketing phrase that's going to re-energize the market and make them feel like this is something new to adopt. And in some ways, I am the wrong audience. Right, I will experiment and play with the metaverse, but the kids growing up will go into the metaverse, they'll hang out in the metaverse, and if they find value in hanging out in that space, and I'm not sure why they wouldn't, because it's quite, bringing up kids today is quite different to bringing up kids when I was a kid. It's a little bit more organized, structured than before, and the ability to get escape from the parents' viewpoint, it's much easier to do that in the metaverse than it is here. So I suspect from that perspective it's going to take off. But for marketing, going back to what I was saying about PR, if you create an island in the metaverse for, I don't know, your Porsche cars, that's going to get coverage in a lot of the media today. 6 months from now, 12 months from now, not so much. So, and it's an exact replica of what happened with Second Life back, I guess it's 10 years ago now. the question's going to be, can it go to the next step and actually translate into value?
Well, see, what's interesting to me is just like you were saying, because I think the biggest question is like we've all heard of, obviously VR, we've heard of blockchain, we've obviously heard of, the oh gosh, what's that new art that's coming out? Anyways,
NFTs,
yeah, NFTs, yeah. And so now the question is how do we leverage to the highest level? Because the reality is just like, TikTok and all, like social media back in 2003, 2004, we never thought it was going to become so important. In fact, I had a guest on, and it's like, it's not social media marketing, it's just marketing. It's just part of it. Like if you're not running that side of things, you're just losing money. And so it becomes just, organic, right? So it becomes natural part of our thing, and that will happen, right? And so the biggest thing is, I think a lot of people are asking themselves, definitely business owners in the B2B and the B2C world, it's like, how do I leverage it? And what are the biggest leverage activities that produce the biggest results, right? And I think that because you can, let's be honest, your attention can be spread across different things, but what's going to actually produce the biggest result? And how do I strategically, put myself and my business in the right position to perform? Because obviously I know a lot of, like TikTok, for example, it's exploding so high that Wendy's and larger companies are putting a game into that because they see it's very prevalent. And that's going to happen in the blockchain, the VR, as well as the NFT side of things. We're seeing that. So I'd love to get your response. Like, how should business owners look at it? Not more like, hey, it's positive. Okay, we get that. But it's like, how do we effectively use the data that we have to create like some sort of strategy around it for our service, for our product, for whatever it may be?
Yeah, look, I really like that you said it's just marketing, and fundamentally that's where you start, right? The basics, the foundations of marketing have not changed in generations. Who are the people? Who's the audience that you need to reach? What is the message that you need to convey? How are you going to build trust and build authority and promote yourself to these people? And who are you? The bit that often gets missed out is the bit that changes all of those answers in those different areas is yourself as a company. If you're, a conservative company, let's say you're a conservative legal firm, the chances are you're not going to go to TikTok, right? It doesn't match with your brand. It's jarring. It's too far away, right? But and so you've got that level of interpretation on it. Let's say we're cutting edge, we're innovative, we're a forward-looking brand. Now, okay, we start to look at it. Well, okay, so TikTok obviously ticks that box as being a place to be if you want to present yourself as a forward-looking marketer. But then you have to start to look at, well, okay, so is the audience right? What are the knock-on effects, right? So there's plenty of startups who want to conquer the world, but you don't conquer the world by going after the whole world. You start with, you might start with London, or you might start with the southeast of the UK, or you might then start going to the whole of the UK. You take it step by step, is my point. And when it comes to these new channels, you evaluate them in that way of, well, okay, the people that are going to be here are early innovators. This segment of my audience are early innovators, therefore I'm going to go to these channels, and I'm going to leverage them in whatever way. From my perspective in B2B for Radiate, the way we present ourselves and think about things, if we were going to go to TikTok, it's quite clear we would go to it from an educational, thought leadership-y sort of place. But most of the stuff that takes off in TikTok today is not so much that content, right? It's much more entertainment. It's much more music led, or and comedy, and all of this stuff is great. If we were a much bigger company, then potentially we would experiment there and test it and see what the response was like, and then build on it over time. But that's how, for me, you evaluate. I don't think you should ever be afraid of these new channels and these new things, but you should go in with your eyes wide open as to why you're doing it, not because the guy next door, your competitor there, suddenly dived in and it looks cool, sort of thing. That's usually a bad way to spend money.
Well, I like what you're saying there, and I think that's a lot of logical way of thinking with it, because obviously you don't want to spend a lot of time and energy producing a TikTok account if that's not acquiring the right clients and your clients not on there, right? It's a very young generation. Maybe majority of your time should be spent on LinkedIn or whatever. And then as well as at a higher level, it's like, okay, hey, in regards to like the VR and blockchain and NFTs, I personally have made a decision not to focus on NFTs and not focusing on that, even though it may hurt me in the long run. I realize that, well, it's just an opportunity that I can't put my attention to, and I'm not going to dominate that, right? And so that's the question you have to ask yourself. Sometimes you may dominate in the VR, and it's okay. You may have to just make that decision internally, say, I'm not going to focus on XYZ channel. So I appreciate that kind of insight. Now, again, Riaz, I appreciate the immense value that you brought in today and just sharing that with our audience. A lot of them are in that situation where it's like, how do I really effectively use the data at my hands to that high level? And I just think it was really incredible insight, obviously increasing the average contract value as well as collapsing that time frame and just sharing really detailed micro level kind of concepts. So before we let you go there, is there any how can our audience reach out to you, my man?
The best way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn pretty much. So connect with me there, message me there. Obviously, we've got the website radiateb2b.com, and there's contact details there as well that you can use to get in touch. But yeah, LinkedIn's the best way.
Awesome. And guys, those links will be in the description below. So make sure you communicate, make sure you reach out to him, make sure you connect with him, because obviously he's a big thought leader in this trajectory where this is happening. And you have to make sure that you have to jump on the train, because the train is leaving, right? And you definitely don't want to be 2020 and then create a Facebook account, right? Because you're shit out of luck, right? So now, is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience before we let you go, my man?
The last thing I'd say is now is a great time to be in B2B marketing and sales. A lot of the old ways of doing things just don't work. And that means that anyone who is really interested in making their mark, it's really difficult to make your mark if everything is static. But when things are changing, now is the time to be able to really try new things and blow it out of the water.
There you go, guys. And that is Riaz. Appreciate you being on here, man, and just obviously the immense amount of value. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can.